Hello everyone, welcome to Horror Stories. Story 1. I had always been fascinated by the history of my family's estate, nestled on the outskirts of a small, forgotten town. The manor, a colossal structure with spires reaching into the sky, had been in our family for generations, each adding their own stories to its ancient walls. My great-grandfather was the last to live there, and after his passing, the estate was left untouched, a relic of a bygone era. Curiosity, coupled with a desire to connect with my roots, drove me to visit the estate. The journey there was long, the final stretch a narrow, winding road through dense forests that seemed to swallow the light. When the manor finally came into view, its imposing presence sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if the very air around it was charged with a silent whisper of the past. The estate was in a state of disrepair, with ivy climbing the stone walls and windows boarded up, as if to keep prying eyes away. The grand front door, however, was strangely inviting, ajar as though expecting it with a deep breath. The interior was a time capsule, undisturbed dust covering furniture that once exuded elegance. As I ventured deeper, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was in the library, a room filled with ancient books and the scent of old paper, that I found the journal. It belonged to my great-grandfather, and within its pages, he spoke of a hidden part of the estate, a section sealed off from the rest of the manor. He wrote of strange occurrences, sounds in the night that could not be explained, and a darkness that seemed to seep from the very walls. His last entry was a warning, a plea for future generations to avoid the sealed section at all costs, driven by a mix of fear and intrigue. I sought out this hidden part of the manor. It wasn't long before I found the sealed door, hidden behind a tapestry in the east wing. The door was cold to the touch, and as I opened it, a rush of cold air greeted me. The air was thick, heavy with a sense of foreboding. The sealed section was unlike the rest of the manor. The walls were lined with strange symbols, and the air was filled with a low, humming noise. It was as I explored this forbidden area that I stumbled upon a room, its door slightly ajar, emitting a faint, eerie light. Beside the room was dominated by a large, ornate mirror. The glass was unlike any I had seen before, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly glow. Drawn to it, I approached, and as I gazed into the mirror, I was met not with mine own reflection, but with the image of the manor as it once was, vibrant and filled with life. Suddenly, the images in the mirror shifted, revealing dark, shadowy figures moving throughout the manor. I watched in horror as these figures seemed to notice me, turning their gaze towards the mirror. A chill rained down my spine as I realized they were not just shadows, but entities trapped within the mirror, their eyes filled with malice. I tried to back away, but found myself unable to move, as if the mirror had ensnared me. The figures began to emerge from the mirror, their forms becoming more defined, more terrifying. It was then that I heard a voice, a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, chilling me to the bone. "You have freed them," it said. In a panic, I managed to break the mirror's hold and fled the room, sounds of the entities pursuing me echoing through the halls. I ran without looking back, the manor seemingly alive with the malevolent presence I had unleashed. Emerging into the safety of the moonlit night, I didn't dare glance back at the manor. The estate, once a symbol of familial legacy, now felt like a malevolent entity, eager to claim anyone who dared uncover its darkest secrets. My heart raced as I stumbled through the underbrush, the chilling whispers and cries of the entities seeming to follow me into the forest. As I pushed forward, the forest around me began to distort, trees contorting into grotesque shapes, their branches reaching out like the hands of the damned. It was as though the entire estate was alive, aware of my desperate bid for escape. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and I found myself questioning if the entities were confined to the manor, or if they had infected the very land it stood upon. The night grew darker, the moon obscured by a thick, unnatural fog that seemed to emanate from the direction of the manor. The air grew colder, and with each step, I felt the grip of unseen forces attempting to drag me back. It was then in my moment of sheer terror that I heard a voice, different from the whispers that had taunted me. It was clear, authoritative, and strangely familiar. "Keep moving forward," the voice urged, a beacon of hope in the enveloping darkness. Driven by the voice, I pressed on, the fog beginning to lift as I distanced myself from the manor. Eventually, I emerged from the forest, finding myself on the outskirts of the town. The first hints of dawn painted the sky, casting light on the path back to civilization. In the days that followed, I wrestled with the reality of my experience. The manor, with its hidden horrors, seemed like a distant nightmare. Yet, the echoes of that night lingered, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between our world and the unknown, where I began to research, delving into the history of the estate and the land it occupied. I uncovered tales of ancient rituals, dark entities worshipped by forgotten civilizations, and a curse that plagued my family for generations. It became clear that the manor was not just a home, but a prison, built to contain the malevolent forces that my great-grandfather had unwittingly unleashed. As with each piece of history I uncovered, the more I realized my escape was not the end, but a beginning. The entities, though temporarily confined to the manor, were growing stronger, their influence reaching beyond the sealed section. The shattered mirror was a gateway, and in breaking its hold, I had not destroyed it, but opened it further. Determined to rectify my mistake, I sought out experts in the paranormal, occultists who understood the forces I had encountered. Together, we formulated a plan to seal the entities once and for all. To repair the breach I had created, it required a return to the manor, a prospect that filled me with dread. Yet, I knew there was no other way to ensure the safety of the world from the darkness that lurked within. The return to the estate was under the cloak of night, a symbolic journey back into the heart of my nightmare. The manor stood as I remembered, a silent sentinel in the darkness, armed with knowledge and resolve. We entered the sealed section, the air heavy with the anticipation of the confrontation to come. The ritual was complex, requiring precise symbols to be drawn, chants to be spoken, and sacrifices to be made. As we worked, the entities attempted to thwart our efforts, their shadows creeping at the edges of our vision, their whispers trying to sow doubt. But we pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure was not an option. As the final chant was spoken, a blinding light filled the room, the air vibrating with energy. The shadows screamed, a sound that threatened to tear the very fabric of reality, before being sucked into the mirror, which repaired itself with a sound like the shattering of 1,000 glasses in reverse. The aftermath was silence, a peaceful stillness that had not graced the manor in centuries. The entities were contained, the gateway sealed. As we left the estate, the first light of dawn broke the horizon, a new day free of the shadows that had plagued my family. The manor remains, a guardian of the darkness it contains, a monument to the thin line between our world and the entities that seek to invade it. My experience, a testament to the courage found in facing one's fears, and the strength in standing up to them. As for me, I've come to understand that some legacies carry burdens, and some doors, once opened, require great sacrifice to close. But in the end, it's our actions in the face of darkness that define us, our willingness to stand against the unknown that ensures the light prevail. Story 2. I never thought much of the old saying, curiosity killed the cat, until my insatiable curiosity led me down a path from which there was no return. My story begins on an ordinary evening, as I walked home from my late shift at the diner. The streets were unusually empty, the only sound being the echo of my footsteps against the cold, wet pavement. As I turned onto my street, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't the cold, but the sight of a figure standing motionless at the far end of the road, in the dim light of the street lamps. I could barely make out his features, but there was something unmistakably off about him. He was dressed in an outdated suit, and his hat cast a shadow that obscured his face. What was most unsettling, however, was how he seemed to be staring directly at me, despite the distance. I quickened my pace, telling myself it was just someone out for a late-night stroll. But as I passed by, I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on me. Glancing back, I saw that he hadn't moved an inch. His gaze still fixed in my direction. A shiver ran through me, not just from the cold. That night, I lay in bed, unable to shake the image of the strange man from my mind. I convinced myself it was just the product of fatigue and an overactive imagination. However, the next night, as I made my way home, there he was again, standing in the exact same spot, motionless, watching. This time, curiosity got the better of me. I approached him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He remained silent, not moving, not reactless, frightened and a little frightened. I turned and hurried home, vowing to take a different route from then on. But it was too late. The strange man had taken root in my psyche, his silent, watching presence becoming a nightly occurrence. No matter which way I went, he was always there, always watching. Friends told me I was working too hard, that stress was playing tricks on my mind. Others wanted to believe them, but deep down, I knew this was no illusion. One evening, driven to the edge of my sanity, I decided to confront the man. I would photograph him, prove to myself and others that he was the figment of my imagination. As I approached camera in hand, he finally moved. The suddenness of it stopped me in my tracks. He lifted his hand, pointing towards the end of the street, towards the old, abandoned house that everyone in town avoided. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a whisper, but it filled the night, echoing off the buildings. "Look beyond what you see." The message was cryptic, leaving me more confused than ever. Yet, I couldn't resist the urge to investigate. The following night, armed with a flashlight and my camera, I made my way to the abandoned house. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding as I entered, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Beside the house was decrepit, the remnants of a life long gone scattered about. As I explored, I felt eyes upon me, not just one pair, but many. It was as though the house itself was alive. Watching, waiting, I stumbled upon a room that felt different from the rest, colder, as if it held a secret. It was there that I found the photographs, hundreds of them covering the walls, each depicting a different person, but all sharing one thing in common. They were taken at the exact spot where I had first seen the strange man, and my heart raced as I scanned the photos, and then I saw it. My own face, staring back at me, a photo taken on a night I couldn't remember, or see the revelation hit me like a physical blow. The strange man, the house, the photographs, it was all connected. But how? My mind raced as I tried to piece it together. It was then that I heard the footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming towards me from the darkness. I turned, flashlight trembling in my hand as the figure emerged from the shadows. It was the strange man, his features now clear in the dim light. His eyes held a depth that was both haunting and sad, a reflection of countless lives entwined with the house's dark legacy. "I am the keeper," he spoke, his voice resonating with a timeless sorrow. "This house, these photos are memories of souls who wandered too close to the darkness. You, like them, sought answers where none should be sought." His words were a puzzle, pieces of a larger, more ominous picture I had unwittingly become a part of. The photos, he explained, were not just images but anchors, tethering the spirits to the house, preventing them from moving on. A photo among them meant I had been marked, chosen by the house itself. "You must leave. Forget this place," he urged, a note of desperation in his voice. But how could I? Knowing now the truth, how could I turn my back on those trapped within these walls? Forced my decision to stay set me on a path of discovery and danger. The keeper, seeing my resolve, offered his guidance. Together, we embarked on a mission to release the spirits, each photo a case to be solved, a story to be understood. At the house revealed its secrets slowly, reluctantly, through hidden rooms, forgotten letters, and spectral whispers. These nights turned into days, and with each spirit we freed, the house grew lighter, less oppressive. But with progress came resistance. Shadows moved with intent, sinister forces working to keep the house and its occupants bound in perpetual darkness. The final confrontation came unexpectedly, a surge of darkness that threatened to engulf everything. It was in this moment of near defeat that the power of the spirits we had freed manifested, their light piercing the shadows, driving the darkness back. The house shuddered, a palpable release of energy. As the last of the photos fell from the walls, their subjects finally at peace. The strange man, the keeper, nodded his approval. His task now complete. As dawn broke, casting light on the house for the first time in decades, he faded before my eyes, his parting words a whisper in the wind. "Thank you." I left the house behind, a monument no longer to despair but to hope and redemption. The experience changed me, opening my eyes to the unseen world that exists just beyond our perception. Now I share this story as a warning and a lesson. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, but for those who dare to look, be prepared for what looks back. Story 3. The first night in my new apartment was marked by an unsettling calm, a silence so profound it felt almost suffocating. Having moved to the city for a fresh start, I was eager to leave behind the echoes of a troubled past. In my apartment, a modest space on the top floor of an old building offered a panoramic view of the city's skyline, a sight I hoped would inspire new beginnings. However, as darkness fell and the city lights twinkled like distant stars, an inexplicable feeling of dread began to take hold. It started with a faint tapping, a sound so subtle it could have been mistaken for a figment of my imagination. I dismissed it, attributing it to the settling of an old building or perhaps the wind against the window. But as the night deepened, the tapping grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from the large window that overlooked the city, a rhythmic banging that seemed to be calling to me. Reluctantly, I approached, peering into the darkness, half expecting to see someone or something. There was nothing, only the vast expanse of the night and the distant lights below, I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a quirk of an old building. But the banging continued, night after night, always starting at the stroke of midnight and lasting until the first light of dawn. It became a haunting melody, a nightly ritual that left me sleepless and on edge. Determined to find an explanation, I began to investigate. I asked neighbors, but none had heard the banging or experienced anything similar. The building's caretaker dismissed my concerns, suggesting it was just the result of an overactive imagination. Refusing to be deterred, I decided to document the phenomenon, setting up to record the window each night. What I captured was unsettling. The video showed the banging, a violent, forceful rhythm against the window. But there was no visible. The window itself vibrated with each bang, yet nothing was there to explain it. The footage became an obsession, a puzzle that defied logic. I scoured the internet for similar occurrences, diving deep into forums and reaching out to experts in the paranormal. The more I became convinced that what I was experiencing was not of this world. It was on a particularly restless night that I decided to confront the source of the banging directly. As midnight approached, I stood by the window, camera in hand, determined to face whatever came. The banging started, as expected, but this time I opened the window, a rush of cold air greeting me. It was a moment of silence, a breath of anticipation, and then from the darkness a voice. It was faint, almost a whisper, but unmistakably human. "Help me," it said, the words carrying a weight of unimaginable sorrow. The voice, I would learn, belonged to a young woman who had lived in the apartment years before. Her life had been tragically cut short, her dreams left unfulfilled. The banging, her way of reaching out, a call for acknowledgement, for release from the bonds of her untimely demise, were moved by my sought the help of a medium, someone capable of communicating with her spirit. Together, we held a silence, a delicate bridge between the living and the dead. Through the medium, the woman spoke of her life, her regrets, and her longing for peace. It was a profound, heart-wrenching experience, one that changed my perspective on life and the afterlife. With our help, she was able to find the peace she sought, the banging ceasing as her spirit moved on. The apartment is quiet now, the nights filled with the normal sounds of a city that never sleeps. Yet, I can't shake the feeling of being watched, a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the next. This experience, while terrifying, has taught me the importance of listening, of paying attention to the whispers of the past. For sometimes, it is in these whispers that we find the keys to unlocking our own chains, freeing ourselves from the burdens we carry. Story 4. I've always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and urban legends were just that to me, stories. That was until the summer of 2018, when my belief system was turned on its head. I had just moved into a quaint, albeit aged, house in the city. It was a fresh start, a way to distance myself from the chaos of city life. The house had character, creaky floors, and an attic filled with relics from the past. It was perfect, or so I thought. My first week passed without incident. I spent my days unpacking and setting up my home office. However, as the days stretched into nights, I began to notice oddities. It started with a feeling of being watched. I chalked it up to the isolation and my imagination running wild. But then the whispers began, faint at first, like a distant conversation where you can't quite make out the words. I convinced myself it was the wind or the house settling. Yet, the whispers grew louder, clearer, morphing into desperate pleas. "Help us," they echoed through the halls at night. chilling me to the bone. I reached out to the locals, inquiring about the house's history, but was met with tight-lipped smiles and a change of subject. My curiosity turned into an obsession. I scoured the local library, digging into newspaper archives and property records. That's when I stumbled upon a series of articles that froze my blood. Decades ago, my house was the site of a tragic event. A family, the previous occupants, had vanished without a trace. No bodies were ever found, and the case grew cold, fading into local lore. Armed with this knowledge, the whispers took on a new meaning. I couldn't shake the feeling that the family was reaching out to me from beyond, seeking closure. Sleep became elusive. Each night, the whispers grew more urgent, more desperate. Then the apparitions started appearing. Shadows flitting in my peripheral vision, figures standing at the foot of my bed, only to vanish when I blinked. I was living in a nightmare. Determined to find answers, I contacted a medium, a woman known for her sensitivity to the spiritual realm. She agreed to visit the house, to help me communicate with the spirits. The seance was set for a stormy night. Lightning illuminated the room as we sat at a makeshift altar, holding hands in the dim candlelight. The medium's voice was steady, inviting the spirits to communicate. The air grew thick, electric. The candles flickered as if caught in a non-existent breeze, then silence. A voice, clear and pained, broke through. "Find us, free us." The plea was heart-wrenching. The medium's face paled. She urged me to search the attic, a place I'd avoided since moving. As the storm raged outside, I ascended the narrow staircase to the attic. The air was heavy with dust and the weight of untold stories. In the far corner, under a loose floorboard, I found it. A box containing the personal belongings of the missing family. But it was what lay beneath the box that shook me to my core. A hidden compartment in the floor, and within it, the skeletal remains of the family, their final resting place. The discovery in the attic was a turning point. I was no longer just a resident of this house. I had become a custodian of its dark history. The skeletons, entwined in a macabre embrace, told a story of desperation and perhaps foul play. I couldn't just stand by. The next morning, under the guise of a gray, summer sky that seemed to mourn with me, I contacted the authorities. The investigation that followed was thorough. Forensics confirmed that the remains belonged to the missing family. The cause of death remained undetermined, but the circumstance suggested they were hidden away post-mortem. Their demise meant to remain a secret forever. The town was abuzz with the news, a mix of horror and relief at the closure of a long-standing mystery. Yet, for me, the whispers didn't cease. If anything, they intensified, now mingled with cries of thanks and sorrowful goodbyes. I had hoped that uncovering the truth would bring peace, but the house seemed more alive than ever. Objects moved on their own. Doors would slam shut in a dead of night, then the shadows. They seemed to dance. It was as if the revelation had stirred something else within the walls of the old house. I began to research the property's history further, digging deeper into its past. And that's when I found mention of a hidden cellar, sealed off decades ago. Overdriven by a mixture of fear and determination, I found the cellar's entrance hidden beneath the aging floorboards of the kitchen. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth as I descended the creaky steps. A flashlight, my only guide in the pitch-black darkness. The cellar was a time capsule, filled with antiques and jars of long-spoiled food. But it was the symbols etched into the walls and floor that caught my attention. Signs of rituals, of a family dabbling in the occult, seeking something beyond the veil. It dawned on me that the spirits of the family were not just trapped by their hidden demise, but were bound to the house by the very rituals they had performed. To free them, I needed to break the chains of their spiritual imprisonment. I consulted with the medium, and together, we prepared a ritual of our own, one to sever the ties binding the spirits to this realm. The ritual was set for a night when the veil between the worlds is thinnest. We drew protective circles, lit candles placed at each cardinal point, and recited ancient incantations. The house groaned and shook as if resisting our efforts. Wind howled through the cracks, extinguishing candles, plunging us into darkness. But we persisted, our voices rising above the chaos. As the final words of the incantation were spoken, a deafening silence enveloped the house. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of peace that had eluded the place for decades. The spirits of the family appeared before us, not as the shadows of before, but as ethereal figures, serene and thankful. With a final glance, they faded away, leaving behind a calm that permeated every corner of the house. In the weeks that followed, the house was transformed. The oppressive air and unsettling occurrences were gone, replaced by a tranquil ambience. I decided to stay, no longer out of obligation, but out of respect for the history and spirits that had become a part of my home. The house, once a site of mystery and sorrow, had become a home, a sanctuary where the whispers of the past were no longer cries for help but grateful echoes of love. And yet, the experience left me changed. I had witnessed the thin veil between our world and the next, touched the intangible, and learned that sometimes the most haunting tales are rooted in truth. My skepticism was replaced with a newfound respect for the unknown, and a reminder that some mysteries, once uncovered, can change us forever. Story 5. It was a truth universally acknowledged in my small town that the woods at the edge were not to be trifled with. Legends spoke of shadows that moved with malice, of voices that whispered to the unwary, drawing them deeper into the darkness. I grew up on these tales, a healthy dose of fear and fascination brewing in my heart. My curiosity was a flame, flickering with the desire to uncover the truth behind the legends. That curiosity would soon lead me down a path from which there was no return. The summer of my 22 ND year was a season of unbearable heat, the kind that drove even the sensible into the madness of seeking relief. It was during one such sweltering night that my friends and I, driven by a mix of bravado and boredom, decided to explore the woods, armed with flashlights and the false confidence of youth. We set out to dispel the myths, or perhaps, to confirm them. The woods were alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, a symphony of the unseen that played upon our nerves. We ventured deeper, the light from our flashlights slicing through the darkness, revealing a world untouched by time. It was exhilarating, walking the line between fear and discovery, until we found the house. It was an anomaly, a structure that, according to every map and local history, shouldn't exist. Yet, there it stood, dilapidated and beckoning. The house was a relic of a bygone era, its architecture out of place amidst the wild. Vines crept up its sides, and its windows stared like empty-eyed sockets. The door, barely hanging on its hinges, moved with a mind of its own, creaking open as if inviting us in. The air around us grew cold, a stark contrast to the summer heat, a warning we chose to ignore. Our decision to enter would be our undoing. Inside, the house was a labyrinth of rooms and corridors, each turn revealing more decay and desolation. The air was thick with the scent of mold and something else, something sinister. We found markings on the walls, symbols that seemed to pulsate with a dark energy. Their laughter and jokes faded, replaced by a growing sense of unease. It was then that the house began to change. Rooms shifted, doors disappeared, and the darkness seemed to swallow our light. Panic set in as we realized we were not. Shadows danced at the edge of our vision, and the whispers started, voices that mocked and taunted, promising a fate worse than death. We were lost, trapped in a maze with no exit, our fears manifesting in the very walls that imprisoned us. Hours passed, or perhaps it was days. Time lost all meaning as we wandered, desperation growing with each passing moment. It was in our darkest hour, when hope was but a distant memory, that we stumbled upon the heart of the house, a room unlike any other, its walls lined with ancient tomes and the air charged with power. At its center, an altar, and upon it, a book that pulsed with a malevolent energy. The realization hit us with the force of a thunderclap. The house was alive, fed by the fears and nightmares of those who dared to enter. The book was the source of its power, a tome of dark rituals that bound the house to this realm. Her presence had awakened it, and now it sought to claim us. We were in the grip of terror, with the house's intentions laid bare. We knew our escape depended on confronting the darkness head-on. The book, ancient and bound in shadows, seemed to throb with a malevolent life of its own. Erudite pages, filled with indecipherable script, whispered rituals and sacrifices, of binding and unbinding. It was clear that to break the house's hold over us, we had to sever its connection to the book. With no knowledge of the arcane but driven by the will to survive, we improvised. We formed a circle around the altar, each of us lending our strength to the other, united in purpose, drawing upon every tale of light overcoming darkness we knew. We began to recite words not of this world, guided by instinct more than understanding. The house raged against us, its structure shaking as if in the throes of an earthquake, shadows swirling in a frenzy. As we spoke the final word, a silence so profound enveloped us, punctuated only by the sound of our ragged breathing. Then, with a brilliance that blinded, light erupted from the book, piercing the shadows, tearing through the darkness. The house screamed, a sound not of this earth, as the light consumed it, burning away the cross. When our vision cleared, we found ourselves outside, the dawn's early light washing over us. The house was gone, reduced to ruins that bore no hint of the malevolence that once resided within. We had survived, but the experience had marked us. We spoke little of it afterward, each of us processing the ordeal in our own way, yet the bond forged in that darkness was unbreakable. In the years that followed, the woods reclaimed the land where the house once stood, as if nature itself sought to erase the memory of the horror that had occurred. But we could not forget. I, more than anyone, felt a responsibility to ensure that the knowledge of what we had faced was not lost, or began to research, delving into the arcane and the occult, seeking to understand the forces we had encountered. My journey led me to scholars and texts obscure, to knowledge hidden in the shadows of society. I learned of the book's origins, of a cult that sought to bridge the gap between worlds, to bring forth entities best left in the depths of the unknown. First in the house, it seemed, was their temple, the book their conduit. Their demise came not from external forces, but from within, their rituals backfiring, trapping them in the house in a loop of perpetual darkness. With this knowledge, I dedicated myself to guarding against such threats. The world is filled with mysteries, some wondrous, others malevolent. The line between curiosity and recklessness is thin, and there are doors that once opened cannot be closed, and my experience in the woods that night taught me the importance of respect for the unknown, and the need to protect the unwary from the darkness that lurks just beyond the veil of our understanding. As I pen these words, the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, a constant reminder of the night that changed my life. I know now that the darkness is never far, that it watches and waits for the unwary, but also know that light exists within us, a beacon strong enough to banish shadows. This knowledge is my shield, my purpose, and my warning to those who would tread where angels fear to venture. Story 6. From the moment I inherited the old lighthouse on the cliff, I knew my life was about to change. The structure, a towering beacon of solitude, had been in my family for generations, though I never understood why it was passed down with such solemnity. My ancestors had been keepers of the light, guardians of the coast, and now it was my turn. But the lighthouse held secrets, ones that would unravel the very fabric of my reality. My first night there was filled with a sense of unease. The lighthouse, operational yet automated for years, possessed an aura of neglect. Its once vibrant walls were now dulled by time, its light a lonely sentinel in the dark, where it decided to explore, to familiarize myself with my new home. That's when I noticed the oddities. Cold spots in random places, the sound of footsteps when no one else was around, and a persistent feeling of being watched. Those days turned into weeks. These occurrences escalated. Lights would flicker without cause, doors would slam shut, and I would often wake to the sound of distant whispers, as if the sea itself was speaking to me. It was during a stormy night, the wind howling like the cries of the damned, that I discovered the journal of my great-grandfather, hidden in a forgotten drawer. The journal spoke of a tragedy, a shipwreck on the rocks below the lighthouse, a century ago. My great-grandfather had been the keeper then, and he wrote of his inability to save the souls aboard, of his despair as he watched the ship succumb to the storm, but it was his final entry that chilled me to the bone. He spoke of visits from the drowned, of spirits who roamed the lighthouse, seeking the light they never reached in life. Armed with this knowledge, I understood that the disturbances were not mere quirks of an old building, but the actions of the lost, reaching out from beyond. I felt a responsibility, a duty to my ancestors and the souls they grieved for, or began to research, delving into maritime records, learning the names of those who had perished, acknowledging their stories. It was then that I decided to hold a vigil, a night of remembrance for the lost. I lit a beacon at the top of the lighthouse, not just a physical light, but a symbol of hope and guidance for the souls still adrift. I read their names aloud, one by one, offering words of peace and passage. As I spoke the last name, the air shifted, the storm abated, and for a moment the lighthouse glowed brighter than ever before. I felt a sense of release, as if a weight had been lifted from the very essence of the place. The whispers ceased, the cold spots warmed, and the feeling of being watched faded away. In the days that followed, the lighthouse was transformed. It felt lighter, as if it had been holding its breath for a century and could finally exhale. I continued my duties as the keeper, but now with a profound sense of peace. The spirits of the lost had found their light, guided not by the beacon itself, but by the acknowledgement of their existence and the release of their pain. The lighthouse stands as a testament not just to my family's legacy, but to the power of memory and the importance of bearing witness to the past. It taught me that sometimes the most haunted places are not filled with malice, but with stories waiting to be heard, souls waiting to be seen, and in seeing them we free not just the spirits, but ourselves, from the chains of forgotten tragedies. Inspired by the newfound peace within the lighthouse and the spirits it once harbored, I delved deeper into its history and my family's connection to the sea. The lighthouse was not just a building, it was a beacon of stories, of lives that had brushed against the eternal, of whispers carried on the wind. My ancestors, I realized, were not merely keepers of life, but of legacies, guardians of memory. This understanding led me to restore the lighthouse, not just its physical structure, but its soul. I repaired the worn stones, polished the lens until it gleamed like a beacon of hope, and I reopened the lighthouse to the public, sharing its history and the tales of those it had guided home, in life and in death. But the story doesn't end there. As I embraced my role as the keeper, I began to experience visitations, not of the restless dead, but of those seeking closure. People from across the country, descendants of the shipwrecked, came to the lighthouse, drawn by the stories of the vigil and the peace it brought. Each visit was a thread, weaving a tapestry of connection and healing, bridging the gap between past and present. One such visitation stands out, a woman elderly and frail, her eyes holding the weight of years. She introduced herself as the granddaughter of the captain who had perished in the shipwreck my great-grandfather had witnessed. For her life, she explained, had been shadowed by the loss, a tale of grief passed down through generations. She had come seeking solace, a connection to the grandfather she had never known, a place where she had never been before. We climbed the spiral staircase to the lantern room, where the beacon shone forth, a pillar of light against the gathering dusk. There, amidst the endless sea and sky, she spoke her grandfather's name, a whispered prayer carried by the wind. Tears streamed down her face, not of sorrow, but of release. It was a moment of profound connection, a healing of wounds old and new. The lighthouse, once a symbol of isolation, had become a place of convergence, where the living met the dead, where stories were honored and souls were remembered, as a reminder that the past is not a chain that binds us, but a foundation upon which we build, a lesson in the power of light to guide, to heal, and to unite. As the years passed, the lighthouse grew into more than just a landmark. It became a sanctuary, a place of pilgrimage for those touched by the sea's capricious nature, and I, its keeper, became a steward of stories, a witness to the silent songs of the lost and the living alike. In the end, the lighthouse taught me that light is more than just a beacon for ships at sea. It is a symbol of hope, a guide through the storms of life, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone, for spirits of the past, with their whispers and shadows, are not to be feared, but embraced, for they are part of the light, part of the story that continues to unfold. Story 7. I had always been drawn to the mysteries of the past. So when I inherited an old bookstore in the heart of a town shrouded in legend, it felt like destiny. The bookstore, Whispers of the Past, was a treasure trove of history, its shelves laden with books on ancient civilizations, forgotten lore, and unsolved mysteries. But it was the town's own legend that captured my imagination, the tale of the Midnight Mirror. The legend spoke of a mirror, crafted in the 16th century, said to possess the power to reveal truths hidden deep within the soul. It was also rumored to be cursed, its reflections ensnaring the viewer in a reality constructed from their deepest fears and desires. For centuries, the mirror had vanished, its existence relegated to myth. Yet the townsfolk spoke of it with a reverence that bordered on fear, as if it still lurked in the shadows, waiting. My curiosity piqued. I delved into the mystery, sifting through ancient texts and eyewitness accounts from generations past. The more I learned, the more the line between fact and fiction blurred, until one rainy night, when fate stepped in. A mysterious figure, cloaked in the shadows of the storm, left a package at the doorstep of the bookstore. Inside, wrapped in layers of cloth and time, was the midnight mirror. The mirror was exquisite, its frame adorned with symbols that spoke of alchemy and the occult. Holding it in my hands, I felt a chill, as if the mirror itself was alive, pulsing with an energy from beyond. Compelled by a force I couldn't understand, I gazed into its depths. The reflection that stared back was me, yet not me. It shifted, revealing scenes from my past, moments of joy and sorrow, each more vivid than the last. Then, the visions changed, showing me paths not taken, lives not lived. Shaken by the experience, I sought to uncover the mirror's origins. My search led me to an ancient society, the Keepers of the Veil, guardians of artifacts that blurred the line between the mundane and the magical. The midnight mirror, it seemed, was one of their most powerful relics, lost to time until now. Realizing the mirror's potential danger and power, I knew it couldn't remain in the bookstore. The visions it showed were too personal, too potent. They could uplift or destroy, depending on the viewer's state of mind. With the help of a descendant of the Keepers, we performed a ritual to seal the mirror's power, to ensure it could no longer ensnare the souls of the unwary. The ritual was a success, or so we believed. The mirror's surface became opaque, its secrets hidden once again. But the story of the midnight mirror was far from over. The visions it had shown me lingered, a constant reminder of the paths we choose and the ones we leave behind. The mirror may have been silenced, but its mysteries continued to echo through the town. A legend reborn after the aftermath. Whispers of the past became more than just a bookstore. It became a sanctuary for those seeking knowledge of the unknown, a place where legends were not just told but lived. And as for me, I'd become a part of the legend, a guardian of mysteries that stretched beyond the veil of reality. So with the midnight mirror's power contained, but its influence lingering, I found myself at a crossroads. The bookstore, once a quiet haven of knowledge, had become a focal point for the curious and the fearful alike. People came seeking answers, drawn by the legend of the mirror and its promise of revealed truths. It was a reminder that some mysteries, once unearthed, take on a life of their own. As the weeks passed, the impact of the mirror on the town grew. Reports of strange dreams and unexplained occurrences became common. It was as if the mirror, even sealed, had awakened something within the fabric of the town, a whisper of the past that refused to be silenced. I realized then that the ritual had not ended the mirror's story, but had started a new chapter. Determined to understand the forces at play, I dove deeper into the history of the Keepers of the Veil and the artifacts they guarded. My research revealed that the midnight mirror was but one piece of a larger puzzle, each artifact linked to a ley line, a current of magical energy that flowed beneath the town. The mirror's presence had disturbed these lines, causing ripples in the veil that separated our world from the unseen. Armed with this knowledge, I embarked on a quest to restore balance. With the help of the descendant of the Keepers, we identified the points where the ley lines converged. At each location, we performed rituals to harmonize the energies, drawing on ancient rites and modern understanding. Each ritual felt like a step closer to understanding the web of connections that bound the town to its legends. But it was at the heart of the ley lines, in a clearing deep in the woods, where the true test awaited. There, the energy was so potent that the air shimmered, a veil of reality so thin that one could glimpse the other side. It was here that we would perform the final ritual, a bid to seal the rifts and prevent the mirror's influence from spreading further. The ritual was a convergence of light and shadow, a dance of elements that echoed the ancient practices of the keepers. We chanted, the words old as time, our voices carrying through the night, intertwining with the energies that swirled around us. And then, at the climax, a silence so profound fell upon the woods, as if the world itself was holding its breath. When dawn broke, the air was clear, the sense of unease that had lingered over the town lifted. The ley lines were calm, their energies harmonized, the veil restored, the midnight mirror remained in the bookstore, a silent guardian of secrets, its surface no longer a gateway, but a reflection of our own world. In the aftermath, I pondered the lessons learned. The mirror had shown me that the line between myth and reality is often blurred, that the past is never truly gone. It reminded me that we are all keepers of our own stories, guardians of our own truths, and as the keeper of whispers of the past, my story was intertwined with the legends I had sought to understand, a part of the tapestry of the town and its mysteries. The bookstore became a beacon, not of hidden truths revealed through magic, but of the power of stories to connect us, to inspire us, and to remind us of the mysteries that lie just beyond the edge of understanding. And as for the midnight mirror, it remains a testament to the journey, a mirror not just of the soul, but of the journey we all take in search of truth. Story 8. The village of Eldridge was a place out of time, its cobblestone streets and thatched cottages a testament to a bygone era. Surrounded by the imposing Eldridge Mountains, it was sheltered from the outside world, a sanctuary and a prison all at once. But it was the woods that bordered the village, known as the Whispering Woods, that held the deepest mystery. Legend had it that the woods were alive, sentient and protective of the village. They whispered to those who dared to walk their paths, voices soft as the rustling leaves, guiding some to safety and leading others astray. The elders spoke of the woods with a mix of reverence and fear, warning the young to heed the whispers, for they were both a blessing and a curse. We arrived in Eldridge on the cusp of autumn, the air crisp with the promise of winter. As a folklorist, I was drawn by the tales of the Whispering Woods, eager to unravel the truth behind the legend. The villagers were welcoming, yet tight-lipped about the woods, their eyes darting to the tree line as if expecting it to reveal its secrets. Driven by curiosity, I ventured into the woods, recorder in hand hoping to capture the whispers. The forest was dense, a canopy of gold and crimson leaves filtering the sunlight into a mosaic of shadows. The air was alive with sounds, but among them, I began to discern something else. A whisper, not of the wind, but of voices. The whispers were elusive, always at the edge of hearing, guiding me deeper into the woods. I followed, entranced by the melody of voices that seemed both ancient and comforting. It was then that I stumbled upon a clearing at its center, an ancient stone circle, the air around it vibrating with an unseen energy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the woods into twilight, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They spoke of the history of Eldridge, of a pact made with the woods centuries ago. The villagers had sought protection from the threats of the outside world, and in return, they promised to honor and preserve the forest. The stone circle was the heart of this pact, a sacred place where the veil between the natural and the supernatural was thinned. I realized then that the whispers were not merely echoes of the wind, but the voice of the woods themselves, a manifestation of the ancient magic that bound the village and the forest. The legend was not just a tale passed down through generations, but a living truth, a reminder of the bounds between man and nature. As I made my way back to the village, the whispers faded, leaving me with a profound sense of awe and a new understanding of the legend. The Whispering Woods were more than just a forest. They were a guardian, a keeper of secrets, and a reminder of the pack that had kept Eldridge safe through the ages. Back in the village, I shared my experience, my recordings, a tangible proof of the legend. The villagers listened, their faces a mix of wonder and relief. The legend of the Whispering Woods, once a whispered tale, had been reaffirmed, its truth a bridge between the past and the present. My time in Eldridge taught me that legends are not just stories, but reflections of our relationship with the world around us. The Whispering Woods continue to speak, a voice from the past guiding us into the future, a reminder that in the heart of every legend lies a kernel of truth. Story 9. It all started on a seemingly ordinary Thursday evening. I had just returned home from a long day at work, the kind of day where the weight of each task lingers on your shoulders long after you've clocked out. My house, a modest two-story building nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, always served as a sanctuary from the hustle and bustle of my daily life. However, that night, it felt different. There was an unease in the air, a palpable tension that made my skin crawl as I inserted the key into the lock. Upon entering, I was greeted by the familiar sight of my living room, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun filtering through the curtains. Yet, the comfort I usually found in this scene was overshadowed by a strange feeling that something was amiss. I couldn't place it, but the sensation of being watched caused the hairs on the back of my neck to stand on end, shaking off the feeling as residual stress from work. I made my way to the kitchen to start dinner. As the night wore on, the sense of unease grew. Every creak of the house settling, every rustle of the wind against the windows seemed to whisper secrets in a language I couldn't understand. Trying to distract myself, I turned on the television, letting the drone of the evening news fill the silence that had become too heavy to bear. That's when I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible knock at the door. Glancing at the clock, I noted it was well past the time for visitors. My heart raced as I approached the door, the sense of dread building with each step. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing but the dark outline of the front porch, bathed in the pale light of the street lamp. Mustering my courage, I opened the door to a blast of cold night air. There was no one there. I retreated to the safety of my home, convincing myself it was just a prank by neighborhood kids. Yet, as I locked the door, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes boring into me, watching my every move from the shadows. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of anxious glances over my shoulder and jumps at every sound. By the time I headed to bed, I was a bundle of nerves, the fabric of my reality fraying at the edges and lying in bed. I strained to listen for any sounds out of place, but was met only with the oppressive silence of the night. Just as sleep began to claim me, a loud bang against my bedroom window jolted me awake. Repounding, I sat up, scanning the darkness for any sign of what could have caused the noise. There was nothing but the night and the eerie feeling of being trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. Received the next few days were a haze of paranoia and fear. I began to notice odd occurrences around my house, objects slightly out of place, doors that I remembered closing standing ajar, and the constant, unnerving sensation of being followed. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, the result of stress and a lack of sleep, but the incidents became harder and harder to ignore. It was during one sleepless night, as I lay in bed watching the shadows dance across the ceiling, that I decided I needed to find answers. The realization came to me with the clarity of a bell tolling in the distance. I was not alone in my house. There was something else here with me, something that lurked in the corners of my vision. Always just out of sight, but never out of mind. And with a determination born of desperation, I began to investigate my own home as if it were a scene from a crime. I examined every nook and cranny, every crevice where darkness seemed to pool just a little too deeply. Anyway, an old, dust-covered journal, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting within was erratic, the words of a person teetering on the edge of madness. It spoke of a presence in the house, an entity that had haunted the previous occupants, driving them to the brink of insanity with its games. The journal detailed attempts to communicate with the entity, to understand its desires, but each entry ended in frustration, fear. It became clear to me that whatever resided within these walls was not bound by the rules of our reality. It was something other, something that fed on fear and reveled in the torment of the living. As I delved deeper into the mystery, strange occurrences escalated. I would wake to find messages scrawled on the mirrors, warnings in a language I felt I should understand but couldn't. Brief photographs would fall from the walls, their glass shattered, the faces of the subjects distorted by unseen hands. And always, the feeling of being watched, of eyes tracking my every move, grew more intense. All the more so for me to determine to confront this entity. I set out to replicate the rituals described in the journal. I gathered the necessary items, candles, chalk, and an object of personal significance. With trembling hands, I drew the symbols on the floor of the attic, the air growing colder with each line as I lit the candles. A wind seemed to rise from nowhere, snuffing them out and plunging me into darkness. That's when I heard it. A voice, low and mocking, whispering my name from the shadows. Panic surged through me as I felt something cold brush against my skin. A touch that promised nightmares beyond comprehension stumbled backwards, scrambling to escape the attic. The laughter of the entity echoing in my ears. The days that followed were a blur of fear and confusion. I could no longer tell where reality ended and the nightmares began. The entity was everywhere and nowhere, a constant presence that haunted my every moment. I knew I had to leave, to escape the house that had become a prison. Story 10. As I sit here now, writing this account in the hope that it will serve as a warning to others, I can't help but wonder if I'll ever truly be free of the entity that claimed my home. The scars it left on my psyche are deep, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the veil of our understanding. And so, I leave you with this cautionary tale, a testament to the terror that awaits those who delve too deeply into the mysteries that should not be explored. Be wary of the shadows, for you never know what might be hiding within them, waiting for its chance to emerge. Continuing from where we left off, the decision to leave was made swiftly. Yet, executing it proved to be a battle against both time and unseen forces. Each attempt to pack my belongings was thwarted by disturbances that escalated in intensity, and objects would disappear only to reappear in impossible places. The air would sometimes grow thick with an inexplicable chill, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord, stretching and twisting into grotesque forms that defied the laws of physics. Despite these terrifying occurrences, I persevered, driven by a primal need to survive. I realized that the entity was feeding off my fear, growing stronger with each passing moment in a desperate bid for empowerment. I turned to the journal once more, hoping to find some overlooked detail that could offer me a means of protection or at the very least a momentary reprieve. What I found instead was a passage that had previously eluded my notice, a cryptic reference to a binding ritual that had been attempted but never completed due to the deteriorating mental state of the journal's author. The details were vague, the instructions fragmented, but it was all I had. With a resolve born of desperation, I decided to attempt the ritual myself, hoping to at least weaken the entity enough to make my escape. The preparation required me to gather items of personal significance, which would serve as anchors to my reality. A concept I clung to with dwindling hope. I selected a photograph of my family, a cherished childhood toy, and a book that had been my grandfather's. Items that represented love, innocence, and wisdom. These, according to the fragmented instructions, would help tether me to the world of the living and protect my spirit from the entity's attempts to ensnare it. As night fell, casting long shadows that seemed to mock my efforts, I began the ritual in the living room, the very heart of my home. I arranged the items in a circle around me and recited the incantations written in a journal. Their ancient words feeling alien on my tongue, the air around me grew colder, the darkness deepening until it felt as if I were suspended in a void. Then silence. A profound, suffocating silence that felt like a pressure on my chest. It was in this silence that the entity made itself known, not through words but through a presence so malevolent, so utterly foreign to this world, that it threatened to shatter my mind. It was a battle of wills, my voice against the silence, my resolve against the terror that sought to consume me. When the ritual reached its climax, the air erupted in a cacophony of sounds, cries of rage and anguish that seemed to come from the very walls of the house. The ground shook, and for a moment I feared that the entity would not be bound but instead freed to wreak havoc upon the world. Then, suddenly as it had begun, the chaos ceased. The house grew calm, the air warming, the darkness receding to the corners where it belonged. I was left in the center of my circle, exhausted and trembling, but alive. In the days that followed, the house remained quiet. The oppressive feeling of being watched had vanished, replaced by a tentative peace. I knew, however, that the entity had not been destroyed, merely contained, but the ritual had provided me with a reprieve, a chance to leave and never look back. And leave I did, with nothing but the items I had used in the ritual and the clothes on my back. The house stands still, a silent sentinel on the edge of the cul-de-sac, its windows dark, its secrets locked within. As I rebuild my life, the memories of those harrowing days linger like shadows at the edge of my vision. I am forever changed, my view of the world irrevocably altered. I have seen what lies beyond the veil, the darkness that dwells in the heart of man and the entities that exist in the spaces between. My story is a warning, a beacon for those who find themselves drawn to the mysteries of the unknown. There are forces beyond our understanding, entities that defy explanation. Seek them out at your peril, for once you have seen the darkness, it sees you return. It was on a cold, fog-laden evening in the small, seemingly sleep-enshrouded town of Eldridge that I found myself driving down its nearly deserted main street. The mist hung low, cloaking the town in a shroud of mystery and an eerie silence that seemed out of place, even for a town as isolated as Eldridge. I had arrived here under unfortunate circumstances, tasked with settling the affairs of a recently deceased relative I had never met, a distant aunt. Her existence was as much a mystery to me as the town she had lived in. The lawyer's letter had been brief, informing me of my inheritance of a quaint, albeit run-down, Victorian house on the outskirts of Eldridge. It was with a sense of reluctant duty and a trace of curiosity that I made the journey, unaware that it would lead me down a path of chilling discoveries and unspeakable horror. As I turned onto the gravel path that led to the house, the tires of my car crunched loudly in the oppressive silence. The house stood as a solitary sentinel against the backdrop of the dense forest that bordered it, its windows dark, the paint peeling from its once grand facade. It was a house that time had forgotten, and one that, as I would soon discover, held secrets that were meant to remain buried. Upon entering, I was met with the musty scent of decay, a tangible reminder of the house's long years of neglect. The furniture was shrouded in dust covers, and cobwebs adorned every corner, casting eerie shadows in the light of my flashlight. It was as I explored the ground floor, making my way through the maze of rooms, that I first heard it. A soft whisper, so faint I thought it might have been my imagination. I paused, listening intently, but the sound did not come again, shaking off the unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach. I continued my exploration, finding little of interest until I stumbled upon a door that was unlike the others. It was made of a dark, almost black wood, with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and move in the dim light. The door was locked, but the key, curiously, was in the lock, as if waiting for me. With a sense of trepidation, I turned the key and pushed the door open, revealing a staircase that spiraled downward into darkness. The air grew colder as I descended, the silence of the house above giving way to a palpable sense of dread that grew with every step. At the bottom, I found myself in a vast underground chamber, the walls lined with bookshelves that contained tomes bound in strange letters, their titles etched in languages I did not recognize. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which lay a book that seemed to call out to me. It was an ancient tome, its pages yellowed with age, filled with writings and drawings that depicted rituals and creatures of a nightmarish nature. As I flipped through the pages, a sense of unease washed over me, a feeling that I was delving into knowledge that was forbidden, that was meant to be left undiscovered. It was then that the whispers returned, louder now, a chorus of voices that filled the chamber with an unintelligible babble. I spun around, flashlight sweeping the room, but there was nothing, only the books and the oppressive darkness that seemed to close in around me. Fueled by a mix of fear and determination, I began to investigate the books, hoping to find some clue as to the nature of the chamber and its contents. What I discovered was a history of the house and my family that I could never have imagined. The house had been built on the site of an ancient temple, one that had been used for rituals that bridged the gap between our world and another, a darker realm that was home to entities that defied comprehension. My relative, it seemed, had been deeply involved in these practices, seeking knowledge and power from beyond the veil. The more I read, the more I realized that her death might not have been as natural as it seemed. The rituals described in the books were dangerous, fraught with peril not just for the practitioner, but for the very fabric of reality itself. As I delved deeper into the mystery, I began to notice changes in the house. The whispers grew more insistent, shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and I had the constant feeling of being watched. It was as if my presence had awakened something that had been lying dormant within the walls of the house, determined to uncover the truth. I continued my research, uncovering references to a final ritual, one that my relative had been preparing for before her untimely death. It was a ritual that promised to open a gateway between worlds, to bring forth an entity of immense power. The implications were terrifying, and I knew I had to act. Armed with the knowledge of the impending danger, I resolved to prevent the completion of this final, perilous ritual. The house, once a place of arcane study and dark practices, had begun to transform in subtle, unsettling ways. The air seemed thicker, charged with an unseen energy, and the shadows cast by the flickering light of my lantern took on menacing, almost sentient shapes. My investigation led me to a hidden room within the house, a sanctum where the final ritual was to be performed. The room was a circle, its floor inscribed with intricate sigils and runes, the air heavy with the scent of ancient incense. At the center, a stone altar stood stained with the marks of countless ceremonies. The books detailed a counter-ritual, one that could seal the gateway and protect the world from the entities that sought entry. The components were difficult to gather, requiring objects of personal significance to anchor the ritual in the realm of the living and symbols of purity to ward off the darkness. Night after night, I worked, preparing the space and myself for the task ahead. The night of the ritual arrived, a moonless sky casting deep shadows across the landscape. The air was electric, the boundary between worlds thinning, making the fabric of reality more malleable but also more vulnerable. As I began the incantations, the house seemed to respond, groaning and creaking as if protesting the words that echoed through its halls. The shadows grew denser, converging on the ritual room, their forms swirling and coalescing into figures that were human in shape but void of humanity. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that sought to drown out mine own, to break my concentration and thwart my efforts. Despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm me, I continued, pouring every ounce of my will into the ritual. The symbols on the floor glowed with a pure, radiant light, casting the shadows back, silencing the voices one by one until only silence remained. As the final words left my lips, a shockwave of energy rippled through the house, shaking the very foundation. The air cleared, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as if a great weight had been removed, for the house, once a conduit for dark forces, was now just a house, its hallways silent, its secrets sealed once more. In the aftermath, I realized that my battle was not just with the entity or the rituals, but with the darkness within us that seeks to understand and control forces beyond our comprehension. The house on the outskirts of Eldridge stands empty now, a testament to the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. As I leave Eldridge behind, the memories of what transpired within those walls linger, a constant reminder of the cost of delving too deeply into the shadows. But there is also a sense of accomplishment, a knowledge that I have prevented a breach that could have had untold consequences on our world. Story 11. It was just another mundane Tuesday when I first noticed something off about the new house at the end of our lane. Its sudden appearance was peculiar enough, considering I hadn't seen any construction crews or moving trucks. Yet there it stood, seemingly overnight, with an air of ancient desolation that contradicted the fresh paint and modern design. My curiosity got the better of me, and despite the unease that gnawed at my stomach, I decided to take a closer look after dusk. As I approached, the temperature seemed to drop, and a chilling silence enveloped the area, swallowing even the usual chorus of nighttime critters. The house, bathed in the moon's eerie glow, appeared both inviting and foreboding. I paused, hesitating at the edge of the driveway, when a flicker of movement caught mine eye. It was a shadow, or what I thought was a shadow until it moved against the direction of any light source. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead, but my feet moved of their own accord, drawing me closer. The front door was ajar, creaking softly in a non-existent breeze. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and something faintly metallic. I called out, "Hello." My voice sounded alien in the quiet. No response came. But a soft thump from the upper floor piqued my curiosity further. Against every instinct screaming for me to run, I ascended the staircase, each step groaning under my weight. The hallway was dimly lit by moonlight filtering through the windows, casting long shadows that danced as if alive. I followed the sound to a door slightly ajar, pushing it open. I was met with a room that looked out of time, filled with antique furniture covered in sheets and pictures on the walls that seemed to watch me. In the center of the room, a rocking chair began to move, creaking back and forth with no one in it. A sob my heart hammered in my chest, and a sense of dread washed over me. That's when I heard it. A whisper, so soft it was almost lost in the sound of mine own breathing. Leave. It breathed, a voice as cold as the air that now seemed to have spun around. But the room was empty, save for the moving chair and the oppressive feeling of being watched. A panic set in, and I stumbled back through the doorway, racing down the hallway and tripping down the stairs in my haste. I didn't stop running until I was back in the safety of mine own home, locking the door behind me. But the sense of unease lingered, clinging to me like a second skin. The days that followed, I avoided the lane in the house at its end, but the encounters didn't stop. Lights would flicker in my home, and I'd wait till the sound of footsteps pacing outside my bedroom door. One night, I saw the shadow again, standing at the foot of my bed, watching me with unseen eyes. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, a product of stress and too many horror movies. But then, neighbors began to share their own stories, whispers of shadows moving in the night, of voices carried on the wind, of an unease that settled over our once peaceful street like a shroud. We gathered one evening to discuss the house and its sudden, ominous presence among us. Old Mrs. Jenkins, who'd lived on the lane the longest, spoke of a legend, a tale of a house that appears to those who harbor hidden fears, feeding on their dread until it consumes them whole. She claimed the only way to rid ourselves of its curse was to confront it, to enter the house and face the darkness within. So, we made a pact, a group of us brave or foolish enough to take back our street from the shadows. As we stand at the edge of the driveway, the house looms before us, a beacon of fear and invitation. What lies within, we cannot say. But together we step forward, determined to face whatever darkness awaits, to end its reign over our lives. The door creaks open at our approach, as if welcoming us into its depths. Our journey into the unknown begins now, and only time will tell if we emerge victorious or if the house at the end of the lane claims us, as it has claimed so many before. As we crossed the threshold, the air turned cold and a palpable tension filled the space. Each of us clutched flashlights, the beams flickering with our trembling hands. As we ventured deeper into the house, the layout was nonsensical. Rooms leading into others with no clear design, staircases that twisted upwards into darkness, and hallways that seemed to elongate as we progressed. The first sign that we were not alone came when the photographs on the walls began to change. What were once benign portraits twisted into grotesque caricatures of their former subjects, eyes following us with an intensity that felt almost physical. Whispers filled the air, voices overlapping in a cacophony of desperation and anger, each word slipping into our minds like a knife. We tried to stick together, but the house had other plans. Doors slammed shut, separating us, trapping each of us in our own nightmare. I found myself in a library, the shelves groaning under the weight of ancient tomes, the pages of which fluttered as if caught in a breeze. The room felt alive, watching me, as the whispers grew louder, converging into a voice that was all too familiar. It was my own voice that spoke, recounting fears I'd never voiced aloud, secrets buried deep within my heart. The realization struck me like a blow. This house didn't just haunt, it knew us. Fed on the very essence of our fears, frantic rose within me, a tide threatening to drown me in my own terror. In a desperate bid for escape, I pushed forward, finding a door that led to a staircase spiraling down into darkness. The air grew heavier, the whispers now screams in the dark. At the bottom, I stumbled into a room devoid of any light, the darkness so absolute it felt like a physical force. And then silence. A suffocating, oppressive silence that seemed to herald the end. In that darkness, I felt something shift, a presence emerging from the shadows. It was the embodiment of the house's malice, a formless terror that had no shape but was all the more terrifying for it. I understood then that to fight it, to survive, I had to confront not just the darkness before me, but the darkness within myself. With a strength born of desperation, I spoke. My voice steady despite the fear, acknowledged my fears, my regrets. But I also spoke of my resolve, my hope, my determination to not be defined by them. Persons recoiled, as if my words were physical blows. The darkness began to dissipate, light filtering in through cracks that hadn't been there before. I pressed on, my words becoming a mantra, pushing back against the night until, with a final, ear-splitting shriek, the darkness shattered. I emerged from the house as dawn broke, the building itself seeming to crumble as the light touched it. One by one, my friends appeared, each of us weary but alive, forever changed by the night. The house at the end of the lane was no more, its hold over us broken. In the days that followed, our street returned to its peaceful state, but the memories of that night lingered. We had faced our darkest fears, confronted the shadows within and without, and emerged victorious. Yet the experience bound us in a way nothing else could, a shared ordeal that would forever remind us of the strength found in facing the darkness together. As I look back on that night, I realize that the true horror wasn't the house or the shadows it harbored, but the realization of how easily fear can consume us if we let it. But so too did I learn of the resilience of the human spirit, of the power of unity and the courage to face the unknown. The house at the end of the lane may have vanished, but its lessons remain, a testament to the light that can be found even in the deepest darkness. Story 12. I found myself drawn to the whispers of the old forest that bordered our town, a place of ancient secrets and fears where the dense canopy seemed to swallow the stars themselves. As a child, I was told stories of the forest, tales meant to instill fear and respect for the natural world and its unseen boundaries. Yet that night, a restless curiosity propelled me forward, beyond reason and the warnings of elders. The air was thick with the scent of moss and decay, the only sound my own footsteps muffled by the underbrush. The deeper I ventured, the more I felt the oppressive weight of unseen eyes watching, following my every move. It was as if the forest itself was alive, breathing and whispering in a language forgotten by time. A sudden chill ran down my spine when I stumbled upon a clearing, perfectly circular and eerily silent, as if sound itself dared not enter. At its center stood an ancient oak, its gnarled limbs stretching skyward, clawing at the void where the moon should have been, but the ground around it was barren, devoid of the life that flourished just a few feet away. An inexplicable sense of dread washed over me. Yet I found myself drawn to the tree, as if by a force beyond my control. As I approached, the ground beneath my feet began to tremble, and the air grew colder. The whispers grew louder, no longer just the sounds of the forest, but voices pleading, warning, cursing. I reached out a hand toward the rough bark, and the moment my skin made contact, the world shifted. Visions flooded my mind, a torrent of memories not my own. I saw the forest in its infancy, watched it grow and change through centuries. I saw peoples of old, their lives and deaths intertwined with the wood, and I saw the tree, a sentinel standing guard over something ancient and powerful, a force contained just beneath its roots. The visions escalated, showing me the tree's darker purpose, a prison for a being of malice and spite, captured and bound by the ancients for crimes forgotten by history. With each passing era, the entity's rage grew, its desire for freedom consuming it until it began to seep into the world in whispers, corrupting, influencing, waiting for the right moment, or the right person, to release it. The panic set in as I realized that person was me. I tried to pull away, but my hand was stuck, fused to the bark as the ground opened beneath the tree, revealing a chasm of swirling darkness. The whispers turned to screams, and I felt the entity's presence looming over me, eager to escape its ancient bonds. In that moment of terror and clarity, I understood the true nature of the stories told to keep us away from the forest. They were not just tales to frighten children. They were warnings, barriers erected by our ancestors to protect us from the darkness they had sealed away. For with every ounce of willpower, I fought against the pull of the entity, against the seductive whispers promising power and freedom. I thought of my home, my family, the town that lay unaware of the danger just beyond its borders, drawing on these thoughts. I managed to wrench my hand free, the action sending a shockwave through the clearing. The chasm began to close, the entity's howls of rage fading as the seal was restored. Exhausted and terrified, I stumbled back through the forest, guided by a newfound respect for the boundaries set by those who came before us. By the time I emerged from the woods, the sun was rising, casting its light on a world that remained unaware of the darkness that lurked so close. I never spoke of that night, but I carried its lessons with me, a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. And so, the stories continue, passed from generation to generation, not just as tales of fear, but as guardians of a truth too dangerous to forget. The forest remains a silent watcher, its secrets preserved by the ancient oak at its heart, and by those who understand the true cost of curiosity. In the weeks following my encounter in the forest, life resumed its normal pace, yet the shadows of that night lingered in my mind like a half-remembered dream. The town moved through the seasons, oblivious to the thin veil that I now knew separated us from the ancient darkness lurking at our doorstep. I found myself walking the boundary of the forest often, drawn by a mix of fear and fascination, always careful to keep my distance. As autumn waned, a series of strange occurrences began to unsettle the town. Pets went missing, unexplained cold spots appeared in homes, and whispers filled the night, seeping into the dreams of the townsfolk. It was as if the forest, or rather the entity contained within it, had found a new way to reach out, testing the strength of its bonds. Determined to understand more about the ancient oak and the entity it imprisoned, I delved into the town archives. Buried beneath dust and neglect, I found references to the tree dating back centuries, each account more foreboding than the last. The oak was described as a guardian but also a warning, a line that should not be crossed. Among the texts, I discovered a faded map detailing a network of stones surrounding the forest, each marked with symbols that resonated with an energy I felt on the night of my encounter. Armed with this new knowledge, I realized the disturbances in town were not just random acts of malice. They were calculated, an attempt by the entity to weaken the seal's binding. The stones, I surmised, were part of a larger ritual, one that maintained the barrier between the entity and our world. With the help of a few trusted friends, I set out to restore the stones, to reinforce the barrier and protect the town. Each stone was found displaced or damaged, its symbols vandalized. We worked under the cover of night, repairing and repositioning them, reciting the ancient words I had found in the archives. As we completed the ritual at the final stone, a howl of rage echoed from the depths of the forest, sending a chill through my bones. The ground trembled, but the air grew calmer, the sense of oppression lifting like a fog at sunrise. We had strengthened the barrier, but the battle, I knew, was far from over. The entity's attempts to break free became more desperate, manifesting in nightmares that plagued the townsfolk, driving some to madness. It was clear that it sought to wear us down, to break the collective will that kept it at bay. In response, we formed a secret society, dedicated to guarding the town against the darkness. We studied the old ways, learned the rituals and symbols that had kept us safe for generations, and taught them to those who would listen. As the entity's influence waned, the town found a new normal, a cautious harmony between the known and the unknown. Years passed, and the events of that autumn became yet another tale whispered in the shadows of the old forest. But those of us who stood watch never forgot the price of our peace. We remained vigilant, always aware that the barrier was not unbreakable, and that the darkness, though contained, was never truly defeated. In the end, the story of the ancient oak and the entity it holds is a reminder. A reminder that there are things in this world beyond our understanding, forces that predate the oldest stories. It teaches us to respect the boundaries set by our ancestors, for they were put in place not to hinder us, but to protect us from the darkness that seeks to devour. And so, the forest stands, a silent guardian of both our town and the secrets it holds. We live our lives in the light, but we do so knowing that the darkness is never far, always waiting, always watching. The balance between light and dark is delicate, and it is up to us to maintain it. For in the end, the true horror is not in the knowing, but in the forgetting. Story 13. And in the heart of winter, when the snow lay thick upon the ground and the night stretched long and dark, a peculiar tale unfolded in the small, secluded village of Eldridge, between whispering forests and craggy mountains. Eldridge was a place untouched by time, where traditions ran deep and ancient superstitions were held as truth. I was a newcomer, drawn to the village's isolation and the promise of peace it offered, but peace was the last thing I found in Eldridge. It began with the dreams, vivid and unsettling visions of a world shrouded in fog, where twisted trees whispered secrets meant to be forgotten. Each night, the same figure appeared, a woman in white, her eyes hollow pits of despair, beckoning me to follow her into the depths of the forest. At first I dismissed these dreams as the product of my own restless mind, but then the disappearances started. One by one, the villagers vanished without a trace, their homes left untouched, as if they'd simply stepped out and never returned. A palpable fear took hold of Eldridge, whispers of an ancient curse spoken in hushed tone. Determined to uncover the truth, I ventured into the forest, following the path laid out in my dreams. The snow crunched beneath my feet, the silence of the woods echoing around me, oppressive and total. I walked for what seemed like hours until I came upon a clearing, and there, beneath the boughs of a towering oak, stood the woman from my dreams. Her presence was both terrifying and mesmerizing, a specter of grief and rage. She spoke without words, her sorrow washing over me, a torrent of images and emotions. I saw the village, centuries past, a place of joy and laughter, and I saw her, a witch. They called her a healer turned scapegoat for the ills that befell Eldridge. Betrayed by those she sought to protect, she was executed, her body buried in an unmarked grave within the forest. But death was not the end. Her spirit, fueled by betrayal and a thirst for vengeance, was bound to the land, an eternal guardian of the forest and a harbinger of doom for those who dare to forget the sins of the past. For the disappearances, I realized, were no accident. They were a reckoning, the witch's curse manifest, claiming those whose ancestors had wronged her. But now she sought my help, a chance to make right the wrongs of history, to break this cycle of vengeance and free both the village and her spirit from the curse. The task was daunting, a ritual of forgiveness and remembrance, to be performed by the descendants of those who had condemned her. With the witch's guidance, I gathered the villagers, convincing them of the necessity of confronting their past. Reluctant and fearful, they agreed, and together we performed the ritual in the clearing, beneath the light of the full moon. As the final words were spoken, a wind rose from the depths of the forest, swirling around us, carrying with it the whispers of the witch. The air shimmered, and for a moment, the boundary between worlds thinned, and she stood before us, not as a specter of vengeance, but as a guardian of peace. With a final sign, her spirit was released, the curse lifted, and the missing villagers returned, as if from a deep slumber. Eldridge was forever changed, the weight of history lifted from its shoulders. The witch's clearing became a place of pilgrimage, a reminder of the power of forgiveness and the dangers of forgetting. As for me, I remained in Eldridge, no longer an outsider, but a keeper of its stories, a bridge between the past and the present. The dreams ceased, but the memory of the witch lingered, a bittersweet reminder of the cost of ignorance and the value of understanding. And so the village of Eldridge lived on, its history enriched by the tale of the witch in the woods, a story passed down through generations, a cautionary tale of vengeance and redemption, of the importance of remembering and the power of letting go. Story 14. On a particularly stormy night, when the rain battered against the windows and lightning illuminated the sky with a spectral glow, I found myself trapped in an experience that would forever blur the lines between reality and the supernatural for me. My story begins with an innocuous decision to stay late at the office, a choice that led me down a path I could never have anticipated. The office, a modern edifice of glass and steel, stood isolated on the edge of town, surrounded by sprawling fields that, on that night, seemed to stretch into the abyss. As the storm intensified, my colleagues departed one by one, leaving me alone with the glow of my computer screen and the incessant tapping of rain against the glass. It was well past midnight when I finally decided to head home. The building was eerily silent, the usual home of activity replaced by the howling wind that seemed to echo through the empty hallways. I gathered my things and headed for the elevator, pressing the button and waiting in the dimly lit lobby. But the elevator did not come. Instead, the lights flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. A sense of unease settled over me as I groped my way to the stairwell, the light from my phone a small beacon in the oppressive dark. As I descended, a cold draft made me shiver, the storm outside resonating with an almost malevolent intensity. Reaching the ground floor, I found the exit door locked, an impossibility that sent panic coursing through me. It was then that I heard it, a soft, whispering voice calling my name from the shadows. I spun around, but there was no one there. The voice called again, a siren song that drew me back into the building, compelling me to follow. I wandered the halls, each turn taking me deeper into a labyrinth of shadows. Rooms that were familiar by day became alien landscapes, twisted by darkness and my growing fear. In the heart of the building, I found the source of the voice, a mirror, its surface shimmering in the non-light like liquid night. The reflection that stared back at me was not my own, but that of a woman, her eyes hollow pools of despair. She reached out, her hand pressing against the glass, and in a voice that was both a whisper and a scream, she told me her tale. She'd been an employee, just like me, dedicated and ambitious. But she'd uncovered a secret, a darkness that lay at the heart of the company, a project that sought to breach the boundaries between worlds. Her discovery had sealed her fate, trapped in a liminal space, a ghost in the machine. Release her, end the project, and prevent the darkness from spreading. The choice was mine, she said, before fading into the shadows, leaving me alone with the echoing silence. With dawn breaking, I left the building, the storm having passed. The world outside seemed unchanged, but I was not the same. Armed with the knowledge of the night's revelations, I faced a decision that would not only determine my fate, but potentially the fate of our reality. I chose to act to dismantle the project and release the trapped souls that had ensnared. The process was arduous, fraught with danger and opposition, but in the end, I succeeded. The building was abandoned, left to stand as a monument to the dangers of hubris, and the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. My nights are no longer peaceful. The storm has left its mark on me, but in the quiet moments before sleep claims me, I find solace in the belief that I made the right choice, that in the between light and darkness, I played my part in preserving the balance. It all began on a cool, foggy evening in late October. The town of Eldridge was known for its picturesque landscapes and a tranquil, if not slightly eerie, ambience that seemed to whisper tales of the past through the rustling leaves of ancient trees. I had recently moved into a modest house on the edge of town, seeking solace and a fresh start away from the bustling city life that had drained me of my energy and zest for life. Little did I know, my quest for peace would lead me down a path far darker and more twisted than the life I sought to leave behind. The first few weeks in Eldridge were uneventful, filled with the mundane tasks of settling into a new home and getting to know the town. The locals were friendly but reserved, often sharing knowing glances and cryptic nods in my direction, as if they harbored a shared secret they dared not voice. I chalked it up to small-town dynamics and focused on my own adjustment, unaware that the undercurrents of something more sinister were at play. One night, as I lay in bed listening to the sound of crickets outside my window, a sudden, sharp knock echoed through the silence, jolting me awake. Confused and slightly unnerved, I checked the time. 3 people could possibly be visiting at this hour. I thought to myself as I hesitantly made my way downstairs. Peering through the peephole, I found the porch empty, the misty night air offering no clues as to my midnight visit, shaking off the unease. I convinced myself it was probably a lost traveler or a prank by local kids in return to bed. I admit knocks persisted night after night, always at 3C. A cream each occurrence leaving me more anxious and sleep-deprived. I installed a security camera, desperate for answers, but the footage revealed nothing. Each night is devoid of presence, as though my inquiries around town were met with sympathetic smiles and evasive answers, further deepening the mystery. Driven by a mix of desperation and curiosity, I began researching Eldridge's history, uncovering tales of ancient rites, mysterious disappearances, and a shadowy figure known only as the Watcher. According to local lore, the Watcher was a guardian of sorts, an entity that roamed the edges of Eldridge, protecting it from unseen evils at the cost of demanding a tribute from the townsfolk. Those who failed to appease the watcher were said to be visited by misfortune, their peace disturbed until they made amends or fled the town. And with this knowledge, I couldn't shake off the feeling that the knocks were a sign, a warning perhaps, from the watcher. Determined to confront this entity and reclaim my sanity, I devised a plan to stay awake and face whatever or whoever sought me out at 3 a.m. As the clock hands inched closer to the dreaded hour, my heart raced with a mix of fear and determination. The house, usually a place of refuge, now felt like a stage set for an unseen audience. Watching my every move with bated breath would position myself in the living room, the digital clock's luminous display, casting a soft glow in the otherwise dark room, the only sound the ticking of the second hand as it marched towards 3 a.m. The moment the clock signaled the arrival of the hour, the knock came, louder and more insistent than ever before. Steeling my nerves, I flung the door open, expecting to come face to face with my tormentor, but again there was nothing, only the thick, enveloping fog and the silent, watchful trees. The air seemed charged with a palpable tension, as if the night itself held its breath. Frustrated and exhausted, I stepped onto the porch, my gaze piercing the darkness, searching for any sign of the watcher. "What do you want from me?" I shouted into the void, my voice swallowed by the mist, as if in response. A cold wind swept through the garden, rustling the leaves and whispering secrets in a language I couldn't understand. It was then I noticed a figure at the edge of the property, a shadowy silhouette that seemed both part of the darkness and distinct from it. My initial instinct was to retreat, but curiosity and an overwhelming desire for answers propelled me forward. As I approached, the figure remained motionless, its features obscured by the night, standing before it. I could sense an ancient, almost primal power emanating from this being, and I knew without a doubt that this was the watcher. "Why have you come to me?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. The watcher's reply came not in words, but in a flood of visions that filled my mind's eye. Images of Eldridge's past, of rituals and sacrifices made to keep darker forces at bay, of a balance maintained by the town's adherence to old pacts. I saw myself too, not as an outsider, but as a chosen guardian, brought to Eldridge to stand watch alongside the watcher. The realization was overwhelming. The knocks, the sleepless nights. They were not a curse, but a call to action, an initiation into a legacy as old as the watcher I understood. It was not just a protector of Eldridge, but a keeper of a deeper truth, one that bound the town and its inhabitants together. In the days that followed, I embraced my role, learning the old ways and the secrets they held. The knocks ceased, replaced by a deeper understanding of the world around me and my place within it. Eldridge, with all its quirks and shadows, became my home in a way I could never have imagined. Years had passed since that fateful night, and though I've never seen the watcher in the flesh again, I feel its presence, a comforting reminder of the balance we maintain. And as I walk the boundary of Eldridge under the cloak of night, I know I am not alone, that we stand guard together, protectors of a world unseen but deeply felt. The day I moved into the old carpenter house on Willow Street, the air was thick with the scent of rain and whispered secrets. The house, a Victorian relic that had seen better days, stood as a testament to time's relentless march, its facade marred by peeling paint and overgrown ivy. The locals spoke of it in hushed tones, hinting at a history mired in tragedy and unexplained occurrences. But to me it was a chance to start anew, far from the shadows of my past. My nearest neighbor, an enigmatic figure named Mr. Alcott, lived in a similarly aged home across the street. Unlike the others in our small community, he kept to himself, his interactions limited to polite nods and the occasional forced smile. There was an air of solitude about him, a barrier that seemed almost palpable, deterring anyone from getting too close. Intrigued and somewhat challenged by his aloofness, I made several attempts to bridge the gap. All met with polite refusals or evasions. Weeks turned into months, and my curiosity about Mr. Alcott grew with each fleeting encounter. It was during a particularly restless night, as the wind howled outside and the house creaked and groaned like a living thing, that I noticed a peculiar light emanating from his home or from my bedroom window. I could see into his attic, where shadows danced against the walls, as if something, or someone, was moving around with purpose. Driven by a mix of concern and an insatiable need to uncover the truth, I decided to investigate. The following night, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a heavy dose of adrenaline, I made my way across the street under the cover of dark. The front door, to my surprise, was unlocked, inviting me into a world that felt frozen in time. Dust-covered furniture filled the rooms, and portraits of people long gone watched from the walls, their eyes following my every move. As I ascended the staircase towards the attic, the air grew colder, the silence more oppressive. When I finally reached the top, what I found was beyond anything I could have imagined. The attic was filled with strange artifacts and ancient tomes, the walls lined with symbols that seemed to writhe under my gaze. At the center of it all stood Mr. Alcott, his back to me, chanting in a language I couldn't comprehend. Before I could retreat, he turned, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that ridded me to the spot. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice a mixture of warning and despair. It was then that he revealed his true nature, not as a recluse, but as a guardian of secrets so dark and ancient that they threatened to consume him. He spoke of other realms, of entities that lurked just beyond the veil of our reality, waiting for a chance to break through. His family, he explained, had been the keepers of this knowledge for generations, tasked with preventing these forces from entering our world. As dawn approached, Mr. Alcott made me swear to keep what I learned a secret to protect the delicate balance that his family had maintained for so long. In return, he offered insights into mysteries that had long fascinated me, drawing me into a world where the line between the natural and the supernatural blurred. I nodded, a silent pledge sealed between us, as the first light of dawn began to seep through the attic window, casting long shadows across the floor, with a heavy heart and a mind swirling with newfound knowledge. I left Mr. Alcott's house as the sun rose, the world around me unchanged yet entirely different. In the days that followed, my interactions with Mr. Alcott evolved. No longer just a neighbor, he became my mentor, guiding me through the complexities of the unseen world he was sworn to protect. While I learned of the rituals and symbols, the delicate art of sealing away that which sought to harm, and the heavy burden of knowledge that came with it, Eldridge, with its picturesque facade, was a nexus of sorts, a thin veil between realities where the past and present intertwined. The more I learned, the more I understood the necessity of Mr. Alcott's solitude. His was a life dedicated to the safeguarding of our reality, a task that left little room for the trivialities of everyday life. And yet in his trust, I found a sense of purpose I had never known. Together we stood watch over Eldridge, guardians of secrets that, if revealed, could unravel the fabric of our world. But with knowledge comes risk, and our efforts did not go unnoticed. Strange occurrences began to multiply in Eldridge, each more unsettling than the last. Shadows moved with intent, and whispers filled the night, as if the veil itself was thinning. Mr. Alcott and I worked tirelessly, reinforcing old wards and casting new ones. But it was clear that something was pushing back with increasing force. The climax of our struggle came one stormy night, when the boundary between worlds threatened to collapse entirely, armed with ancient artifacts and incantations passed down through generations. We faced the darkness head-on, a battle waged in the shadows that would determine the fate of Eldridge and beyond. A storm raged around us as we chanted, the air crackling with energy as we drew upon the old magics. The boundary quivered, then held, the threat abating as suddenly as it had appeared. Exhausted but victorious, we watched as dawn broke, the storm giving way to clear skies. In the aftermath, Mr. Alcott and I knew that our victory was but a reprieve. There would be other threats, other battles to fight. But in that moment, there was also hope, a belief that as long as there were those willing to stand against the darkness, the light would prevail. As years passed, I took up the mantle passed down to me, becoming a guardian in my own right. Mr. Alcott, ever the mentor, eventually left Eldridge, his legacy living on through the knowledge he imparted and the impact he had on my life. The Carpenter House on Willow Street, once a symbol of my desire to escape, became a beacon of protection, a reminder of the unseen forces that weave through the tapestry of our existence. And as I stand watch over Eldridge, I do so not with fear, but with a resolve born of understanding, a guardian of the threshold between worlds. Story 14. The town of Marrow's End had always been cloaked in whispers of the unexplainable, but nothing had prepared me for the events that would unfold upon my arrival. I'd come in search of silence, a reprieve from the cacophony of city life, drawn to Marrow's End by tales of its secluded beauty and timeless charm. The locals, a tight-knit community of souls weathered by the sea and salt, welcomed me with a warmth that belied the chill of the coastal air. My rented cottage, perched on the cliff's edge overlooking the vast, tumultuous ocean, was quaint, its walls echoing with the whispers of 1,000 storms. It was here amidst the solitude that I first heard it, the sound of my own voice calling out to me from the forest that bordered the property. The voice was unmistakable, a perfect imitation, yet I was alone, the nearest neighbor a mile away. Rational thought battled with rising dread as I ventured towards the source, the dense thicket of trees swallowing me whole. The voice called again, a siren song that pulled me deeper into the labyrinth of ancient pines and shadow. It was in the heart of the forest that I found her, or rather it, a creature of such surreal beauty that my breath caught in my throat. She, if such a term could be applied, mirrored my every feature, from the curve of my jaw to the shade of mine eyes, but there was a fluidity to her movements, a grace that was almost ethereal. "Who are you?" I masked my voice, betraying my fascination. "I am you," she replied, her voice a perfect echo of my own, "and yet I am not." The days that followed were a descent into the uncanny, as my doppelganger began to integrate herself into my life with unsettling ease. She knew my habits, my preferences, even my thoughts, as if she had access to the innermost recesses of my mind. The townsfolk, initially unaware of her true nature, accepted her as nothing more than a twin sister, long lost or previously unmentioned. It was only when the disappearances began that suspicion turned towards the creature that wore my face. One by one, those who had grown too curious, too close, vanished without a trace. Their absence of void where once there had been laughter, and the creature, my mimic, seemed to feed on the confusion and fear, growing bolder with each passing day. Confrontation was inevitable. Armed with folklore and whispered legends, I sought to reclaim my identity, to banish the entity that threatened to overwrite my existence. The final confrontation, a clash of wills fought in the shadow of the forest, would decide not only my fate, but the fate of Merosin. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold, I made my way to the heart of the forest, where the boundary between our worlds seemed thinnest. The air was charged, electric, as if the very earth anticipated the coming battle. There, in a clearing bathed in the dying light, stood my mimic, her expression a mirror of my own determination. "I don't want to destroy you," I began, my voice steady, "but I cannot let you erase me." Her smile was a twisted reflection of sorrow and longing. "I don't seek to replace you," she said, her tone laced with an emotion I couldn't place. "I seek existence, a sliver of reality to call my own." The revelation struck a chord within me, a resonance of shared isolation and desire for belonging. It was then I understood. The mimic was not a malevolent entity, but a lost soul, trapped in a cycle of mimicry in search of identity. Her solution, when it came, was as unexpected as our confrontation. Together, we performed an ancient rite, a plea to the forces that govern the thin places of the world. We asked for separation, for the mimic to be granted her form, her own life, separate from the shadow of mine. The ritual was a gamble, a whisper into the void with hopes of an answer. An answer it did. The air shimmered, reality bending and twisting around us as the mimic was enveloped in a blinding light. When it faded, she remained, but altered. Similar, yet undeniably distinct, her features now her own. The creature that stood before me was no longer a mimic, but a person, a being with her own identity, free from the bonds of imitation. Gratitude shone in her eyes, a silent acknowledgement of the gift of self that had been granted. In the weeks that followed, the mimic, now known by her chosen name, Ilra, integrated into the community of Marrow's End. The disappearances ceased and peace returned to the town, its residents none the wiser to the truth of the events it had transcended. As for me, the experience left a mark, a deepened understanding of the complexities of existence and the interconnectedness of all beings. Marrow's End remained my home, a sanctuary, not just from the noise of the world, but from the echo chamber of mine own self. The tale of the mimic, and I became a legend of its own, whispered in the same breath as the other mysteries that shrouded Marrow's End. But to me it was a reminder of the power of empathy and the importance of seeking understanding beyond the surface. As I sit on the porch of my cottage, watching the sunset over the ocean, I am reminded that sometimes the greatest discoveries come from looking within, and that even in our darkest moments, there is the potential for transformation and renewal. Story 15. The small town of Greystone had always been a place where nothing out of the ordinary happened. Its claim to fame was the historic Greystone Inn, a charming bed and breakfast that had served travelers for over a century. My decision to stay there was driven by a desire for peace and a break from the relentless pace of city life. What I found instead was a mystery that would consume me. But from the moment I arrived, it was clear that the Greystone Inn was more than just an old building. The air inside was thick with the scent of aged wood and whispered secrets. The walls adorned with portraits of long-gone guests whose eyes seemed to follow me. The innkeeper, a kindly old woman named Mrs. Hathaway, welcomed me with a warmth that felt genuine but tinged with an undercurrent of unease. My first night passed without incident, but on the second, I was awakened by the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Assuming it was another guest, I tried to return to sleep. only to be disturbed again, this time by a soft plaintive weeping that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere all at once. The following morning, when I inquired about these disturbances, Mrs. Hathaway's face turned pale and she quickly changed the subject. Curiosity piqued. I decided to investigate the history of the Greystone Inn, uncovering tales of a tragic past that the locals whispered about in hushed tones. The inn, it seemed, had been the site of a devastating fire in the early 1900s, one that claimed the lives of several guests. For since then, rumors of hauntings and unexplained phenomena had clung to the place like a shroud. Determined to uncover the truth, I spent my nights awake, listening and watching for any sign of the supernatural. What I discovered was beyond anything I could have imagined. The weeping returned, leading me to a hidden room in the inn's basement, a room that had been sealed away for decades. The air was cold, the remnants of charred walls and furniture painting a grim picture of the fire's aftermath. It was in this room that I encountered her, the ghost of a young woman, her ethereal form flickering in a dim light. Through whispered words, she told me her story, a tale of love lost and a fateful night that had trapped her between worlds. She spoke of others' spirits bound to the inn, unable to move on due to the trauma of their untimely deaths. Removed by her story, I promised to help her find peace. The days that followed were a blur of research and rituals, ancient rites aimed at releasing the trapped spirits. With each spirit freed, the atmosphere in the inn lightened, the haunting phenomena diminishing until, at last, the ghostly woman herself found rest, her apparition fading with a final, grateful smile. As the final spirit found peace, the Greystone Inn transformed. No longer did an air of sorrow permeate its halls. Instead, a serene calm settled over the property, as if a great weight had been lifted. Mrs. Hathaway, who had watched the changes with a mix of awe and disbelief, finally shared the full history of the inn, acknowledging the hauntings that had long been a part of its legacy. The town of Greystone, too, seemed to awaken from a long slumber. Word of the inn's cleansing spread, drawing visitors not only in search of its historic charm but also intrigued by the tales of its past and the peace it now offered. The inn became a place of healing, a sanctuary where the weary could find rest and perhaps a moment of connection with the deeper, unseen currents of life. In the months that followed, I found myself drawn back to Greystone Inn, unable to stay away for long. It had become a place of profound personal significance, a reminder of the thin veil between the seen and the unseen and of the power of compassionate understanding to transcend boundaries. Through my experiences at the inn, I had also changed. No longer did I view the world through the narrow lens of skepticism and rationality alone. I'd seen firsthand the impact of unresolved grief, of spirits caught in a limbo of their own making, and the healing that could come from acknowledging and addressing the past. My story of the Greystone Inn, when I finally chose to share it, was met with a mix of fascination and skepticism. Yet, those who had experienced the transformation firsthand could not deny the truth of the events that had unfolded. The inn and Greystone itself had become a beacon for those seeking not just the thrill of the paranormal, but a deeper understanding of the mysteries that lie just beyond the reach of our understanding. As years passed, the Greystone Inn continued to thrive, its legacy now enriched by the stories of those it had touched. Mrs. Hathaway, ever the gracious host, would often sit with guests in the parlor, sharing tales of the inn's history and the spirits that had once walked its halls. And me, I became a regular visitor, each day a pilgrimage of sorts, a return to the place where my journey into the unknown had begun. The inn had given me a gift, the knowledge that there is more to our existence than what we see, that in every shadow there may be a story waiting to be told, a soul waiting to be understood. In the end, the Greystone Inn was not just a place of rest for the living, but a bridge between worlds, a testament to the enduring power of memory, love, and redemption. Story 16. In the quaint town of Hollow Creek, nestled between dense forests and rolling hills, there existed a legend that on certain fog-laden nights, the dead walked among the living. As a writer drawn to the macabre, this myth became the focus of my latest project, a book that would explore the boundaries between life and death. I arrived in Hollow Creek under the guise of a simple traveler, but my intentions were to delve deep into the heart of this mystery. The townsfolk were reticent at first, their eyes clouded with unspoken fears whenever I broached the subject of the walking dead. It wasn't until I met Alina, a woman of advanced years, with a gaze as sharp as her wit, that the veil began to lift. She invited me into her home, a cottage that seemed as old as time itself, and there, by the light of a crackling fire, she shared the truth behind the legend. Death isn't the end. Not always, she began, her voice a whisper that seemed to blend with the wind in Hollow Creek. The veil between the living and the dead is then a mere gossamer that can be breached. But those who return, they do so not to haunt or harm, but to seek closure, to mend the ties that bind their souls to this world. Intrigued and somewhat skeptical, I pressed her for proof, a request I would soon regret. Alina's story was not just folklore, it was her reality. Her husband, Thomas, had been one of the walking dead, returning each year on the anniversary of his passing to visit her, a spectral presence in the home they had once shared. Determined to witness this phenomenon for myself, I persuaded Alina to allow me to stay the night of Thomas's expected visitation. What I experienced shattered my understanding of life and death as midnight approached and Thomas descended upon the cottage, and with it, the figure of a man, ethereal yet unmistakably real. Thomas's visit was not one of terror, but a poignant reunion. He spoke not with words, but with memories, of flooded shared moments that filled the room with a palpable sense of love and longing. It was a closure, a final goodbye that allowed his spirit to move on, leaving behind a sense of peace that enveloped Alina like a warm embrace. The experience compelled me to rethink my project, to shift the focus from the horror of the undead to the beauty of unresolved spirits finding their rest. My time in Hollow Creek taught me that the line between life and death is not only thin, but often blurred, a boundary that, when crossed, reveals the depth of human connections that transcend the physical world. As the days passed, my conversations with the townsfolk of Hollow Creek deepened. Each shared their own tales of encounters with the walking dead, not as fearsome revenants, but as loved ones seeking solace or offering comfort from beyond the grave. These stories painted a picture of a community bound not just by the land they shared, but by a collective understanding of death as another stage of existence, a continuum rather than an end. Inspired by these revelations, I set out to explore the forests that bordered the town. The place where the veil was said to be thinnest was with Alina's blessings and a heart brimming with curiosity. I ventured into the woods as twilight gave way to night, the mildest sliver of silver in the ink-black sky. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustle of leaves, and the distant call of nocturnal creatures. But beneath it all was a silence profound and ancient. It was here, in a clearing bathed in moonlight, that I encountered them, the walking dead of Hollow Creek. They were not the grotesque figures of horror tales, but ethereal, their presence more like a whisper of life than a declaration of death. Each spirit seemed to be on a journey, their paths crisscrossed with those of the living, intersecting in moments of shared memory and emotion. I watched a silent observer as they moved through the forest, each step a testament to their unresolved ties to the world they had left behind. The realization that I was witnessing something deeply sacred was overwhelming. These spirits were not to be feared, but understood, their return a reminder of the bonds that death could not sever. It was a night of profound revelations, one that would forever alter the course of my book and my perception of the afterlife. Upon my return to Elena's cottage, I shared my experiences, finding in her a kindred spirit, someone who had long understood the truths I had only just begun to grasp together. We spoke of the importance of closure, of acknowledging the continued presence of those we have lost in the fabric of our lives. But my book, when it was finally published, bore little resemblance to the horror story I had initially envisioned. Instead, it was a narrative of hope, a collection of stories that showcased the enduring connection between the living and the dead. Hollow Creek, with its thin veil and walking dead, became a symbol of the universal journey toward understanding and acceptance. Years later, I often find myself returning to Hollow Creek, drawn back by the memories and the lessons learned. The town remains a beacon for those seeking to understand the mysteries of life and death. A place where the walking dead remind us that love, in all its forms, is eternal. Story 17. It was a night unlike any other in the small, usually tranquil town of Edgewater. The wind howled outside, a prelude to the storm that was forecast to sweep through the area. I found myself alone in my home, a quaint two-story house at the edge of town, the kind of place where everyone knows each other and nothing ever seems to happen, that is, until tonight. The first indication that this night would be different was the sound of footsteps on the porch. Not the hurried steps of someone seeking shelter from the impending storm, but slow, deliberate movements that stopped just outside the front door. Puzzled, I peered through the peephole but saw no one, assuming the wind was playing tricks on me. I returned to my living room, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled in the pit of my stomach. Minutes later, the footsteps returned, this time accompanied by a soft, almost melodic whistling that seemed to echo through the otherwise silent house. This time, when I looked through the peephole, my breath caught in my throat. There, in the dim light cast by the porch lantern, stood a man. He was looking right at me, or so it seemed, his features obscured by the shadows. I called out, asking what he wanted, but received no response. He simply stood there, his presence an unspoken challenge to the safety and sanctity of my home. The rational part of my mind screamed to call the police, but another part, driven by an inexplicable curiosity, urged me to open the door. Against my better judgment, I locked the door, the gust of wind that greeted me sending shivers down my spine. But the man was gone, vanished as if he had been nothing more than a figment of my imagination, confused and more than a little frightened. I closed and locked the door, retreating to the safety of my living room. Yet the encounter left me restless, my thoughts racing as I tried to make sense of what had happened. Who was he? What did he want? And why, despite the fear he inspired, did I feel such a profound sense of loss at his disappearance? The storm arrived in full force, the wind and rain battering the house as if nature itself was in turmoil. It was amidst this chaos that I saw him again, this time standing at the edge of my backyard, staring up at the house. The sight of him so calm amidst the storm was both terrifying and mesmerizing. But compelled by a force I couldn't understand, I opened the back door, stepping out into the night. The rain soaked through my clothes, the wind whipped at my hair, but all I could focus on was the man, the mystery that stood before me. As I approached, He turned, leading me deeper into the backyard, towards the old oak tree that had stood there for centuries. It was there that he spoke, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Listen closely," he said, his voice calm amidst the tempest around us. "This town, your home, rests on thresholds unseen, gateways that have begun to fray, letting through whispers of what lies beyond." His words, cryptic and laden with a weight I couldn't fully grasp, ignited a flurry of questions. Before I could voice any of them, he continued, "I am a guardian of sorts, tasked with mending these tears, preventing the shadows from seeping through. But I cannot do it alone. The storm tonight is no coincidence. It's a manifestation of the unrest beyond, the signal that the barriers are weakening." The absurdity of his claim battled with the part of me that witnessed the impossible that night. The man, seeing the skepticism in my eyes, simply nodded towards the oak. Beneath its ancient boughs, the air shimmered, revealing a tear in the fabric of reality itself, an abyss that gazed back with an intensity that threatened to engulf me. "For so what you see is but a fraction of what lies beyond. I've come to ask for your help," he said, his gaze piercing through the veil of rain between us. "Your connection to this place, your belief in the impossible makes you a beacon capable of aiding in the restoration of the boundary." The decision weighed heavily on me, a choice between the life I knew and a responsibility towards a reality I couldn't fully comprehend. Yet, standing before the tear beneath the oak, feeling the pull of the abyss, I knew I couldn't turn away. The connection he spoke of, an intrinsic bond to the land, its hidden depths, resonated within me, a call to action that couldn't be ignored. With a nod of acceptance, the guardian offered a smile, the first true expression of warmth I'd seen from him. "Together, we can mend the tears, restore the balance. But be warned, the path is fraught with shadows that will test your resolve." The weeks that followed were a blur of activity, each night venturing into the heart of the storm, the guardian teaching me to weave the threads of reality back together, to seal the tears that had begun to mar the fabric of our world. The work was exhausting, both physically and mentally, as I was introduced to realms and beings that defied logic, each encounter a test of my courage and conviction. As the final tear was sealed, the storm that had raged above Edgewater for weeks dissipated, leaving behind a calm that permeated the town. The guardian, his task completed, prepared to depart, but not before offering a final piece of wisdom. The balance between worlds is a delicate one, always in flux. You've shown great strength and courage, qualities that will serve you well as the new guardian of the thresholds. Remember, fear and curiosity are two sides of the same coin. Wield them wisely. With those parting words, he vanished, leaving me alone beneath the old oak, the weight of my new responsibilities settling around me. Edgewater returned to its peaceful existence, its inhabitants unaware of the battles fought in the shadows to preserve their tranquility. As for me, I embraced my role as guardian, vigilant against the whispers of unrest, ready to protect the town and its unseen thresholds from the shadows that lurk just beyond our perception. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure to subscribe for more stories. Thank you for listening, and I wish you good health. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support us. Thank you very much.